I just think it's important for us as humans with brains, minds, and projects that go into the future, perspectives that try to understand the meaning of this thing called life. People have always questioned it. They've turned all kinds of rituals into panaceas for their fear of the afterlife. All kinds of things have been created by the human. So personally, I think that one of the paths to a higher state possibly possibly for some people, could be an investigation of the self. And it doesn't have to be intellectual, and it doesn't have to be with a scalpel. You don't have to vivisect it. Well, maybe you do. Maybe you're watching it while it's alive. The self, which has been described by philosophers and psychologists and neurophysiologists, etc., is really mostly an illusion. Now, you can say the center of the self is the body, and you'd be absolutely right, for the body is the fundamental field of consciousness. And that's where the real self is, but that requires some investigation. But what has happened is we become divided beings. We separate from the body, as we very well know. People look at themselves from the outside. I don't mean just with the selfies, but narcissism has been alive and well for centuries in the lives of people, whereby people try to establish themselves as glorious things in the minds of other people. And to limit that to only a handful of people would be self-deceitful. So anyway, we are divided beings. We tend to divide ourselves in various ways. We divide ourselves from our image, we divide ourselves from our actions. We don't even, in so many cases, don't even acknowledge when we're wrong because we're so defensive of that vulnerable self. My God, it couldn't be my fault. It has to be the fault of the world. Something out there made me do it, but I'm innocent. I don't want to be punished. So really what it all comes down to is this conatus. It's a fundamental drive of the self to, as Bentham pointed out, to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And that takes on various symbolic forms in the complicated, the sophisticated life of the human being. Seeking pleasure may be dedicated to by going to a law school and getting a law degree and practicing hard so that one can play hard. Seeking pleasure takes lots and lots of forms, and inherent in it, the other side of the coin, is the fear of pain. So unless you're an absolute crazy person, you seek pleasure and you want to avoid pain. That's the beginning. It may become very sophisticated. You may become saintly. You may become an intellectual genius. But you will still be driven by trying to do something good for the self. Even the people who go to Buddhist camps seeking to dissolve the self, go sit in the Zen, Satzen posture, sit for hours and hours and allow a person to keep you awake with a sharp stick as he observes you falling off, trying to keep you awake so that you somehow will dissolve the self, you will transcend the self, and you will be absolutely free. All those people are still motivated by the self, and thus it's obviously a very difficult enterprise. For the self is trying to give up the self. But while it wants to give up the self, it wants to retain the self, for it cannot help but be in this condition. It cannot help it. We are not capable of not being selfish in some fundamental way. The mother who gives up her life for her children is selfish in that deep sense of the word. It's obviously not a pejorative. It's not an insult. It's simply a fact of the human condition. The love of the family and the normal person, many of you, the love of the pet. I see so many dogs on Facebook. The love of the pet, so absolutely without condition, so without shadows. That love still originates through the self. It is this love, it is my love, and you feel it in this body. But there's where the release is. I get ahead of myself. But let's look at the way the self relates to other selves. Well, one of the first things that existentialists would tell us is that there's a sense of instrumentality in every perception, and they're right. I mean, a thing is useful is not useful. It's enjoyable to look at or not enjoyable. The woman is attractive or she's not attractive. There are so many ways to look at it, but instrumentality is involved in everything. The pretty girls in high school sitting around cat-like making fun of the fat girl, saying that she ought to lose weight and she ought to do this and ought to do that, really don't mean it. They're just so happy that she exists so that they can compare themselves against her. That poor thing. They are the alpha, she is the omega. I am so much more worthy than you. I am so much more significant in the eyes of others, in the eyes of the peers who are now the anchor in their lives, now that they're breaking away from the parents in their teens. The peers are so important, and maybe that's behind one of the reasons why kids commit suicide so often. So many kids committing suicide. Bullied kids, harassed kids, just unhappy kids. All kinds of ways of killing themselves. They die quite often. So it is quite possible that for many people to go into their 40s and their 50s and their 60s with the same fundamental, unfortunate instrumentality, narcissism principle at work in their heart. They still look at people in a certain way, and they have not stopped judging all these years, and it's not going to stop judging as you get older. The habits just become deeper. The wax that was soft and malleable when you were so young has hardened, and the imprint of all the experiences, negative experiences, is still embedded in the waxen figure that is you. And so you harden, and you actually believe yourself to be some kind of substance, because you are, after all, a body. But what you don't realize about the body is that the body is not essentially a thing. We think of it as a thing, a substance, like an island on its own, an island among other islands. I call it a bubble on the surface of the ocean in relationship to all the other bubbles. It navigates through the bubbles. It takes a while, but every single bubble eventually, in short order, 80, 90 years, 100 years, not much more, 20 years, doesn't really matter. It can happen anytime. The bubble can burst. Some bubbles burst right away, some bubbles last a long time in terms of their own relative lives, but not in the life of the ocean. And that's what we are. We're quantum mechanic furnace, fire energy. That's what we're made of. We're made of the same stuff as Carl Sagan would tell us. Star stuff. We're all made of the same subatomic particles. And at that level, at that matrix, there's a potential for things far beyond us. But if we can imagine it, I guarantee you that it can happen. Anything you can imagine can happen, because that matrix is the world of all possibilities. There's so much to it. But back to the bubbles. The bubbles think that they're separate from one another. And they even are separate from the matrix. They don't realize that the matrix is what the one they should be looking for when they go look for God. No, they're looking for God up above the clouds. No, look into your feet. Your feet are made of God. That's where everything is. If there's a God, then there's a God at the heart of all material existence. It's not a separate thing. It's not a thing to begin with. It's an awareness. It's an intelligence. It's a whatever you want. It's not an old man in the sky with a beard, unless you want to make it that way. You can turn it into anthropomorphisms. You can do whatever you want with it, like any other primitive thinker. And that would be fine, because there's so much poetry and mythology and art involved in it. It's beautiful, and I don't discourage it. But take a fundamental primary look at the foundation of your existence, and then look at the fundamental foundation of other beings, of all other beings, all other sentient beings. And especially since we're talking about humans, look at the other humans, the bubbles. I manifested it as the grapes of wrath in one of my books, depicting a room, an enormous room with an enormous stem of grapes, loaded with grapes, and all of them slashing away at one another with knives and swords, dying, and just so many of them, but they're all life-size, they're all the size of humans. And I'm just, my character is just astonished at the sight of it, and of course his guide tells him that it's the human condition. They all arise from the same place, they are all nourished on the same vine, they're made of virtually the same stuff in almost every way. They're interdependent too. But all they see is the separation, and they slaughter one another. And who's going to deny that as a fact of this world, unless you have no understanding of history whatsoever? This goes on all the time. People murder each other, slaughter each other all the time. And it's based upon a lie, and the lie is the separation. But of course, we can't see otherwise. We have a special twist in the brain that Alan Watts referred to in one of his books. It's just the structure of the brain that causes us to feel so separative. That ego in itself is just a twist, and it doesn't have to be. And it wouldn't have to be. You can look at some animals that don't have quite the same structure, but big brains like dolphins, whales, and they're so much more peaceful to other members of their own species. Amazing, amazing. So, is it necessary for us to live in a condition which I have long ago called a condition of alienation? It's basically alienated from oneself. I channel Erich Fromm in this. To be alienated from oneself, to be in the mind-body dualism, is to be also alienated from nature and from other people and from whatever version of God that you have. And I personally have found that in doing all the things that I ever did, the meditations and the Rolfing and all the different things, the body consciousness things that I tried, that it did get me back to a point where at least I realized that this is all one piece, and I am one piece with it. I'm not in a condition of some psychedelic state of consciousness where I don't see distances and differences. It's not that, but I don't feel alienated from it. It's all arising in this consciousness, and therefore this consciousness and it are, to call it essential to oneself is to underestimate it. They don't exist without each other. This consciousness doesn't exist without the phenomena. Every neurophysiologist would tell you that, every doctor of consciousness, even the Tibetan Buddhists would tell you that, except that there have been some people like Franklin Merrill Wolf who have experienced consciousness without an object. Now that is something, and I do accept that to be true, because I will openly admit, risking ridicule, but I too have this consciousness that is speaking now, or observing the speech now. This consciousness has also been awake, where there were no objects, there was nothing at all. This consciousness was there a number of times as a child, and then later on during some meditations. And it's quite remarkable. But as a child, it was most dramatic, for it was full, and there was a realization that I had always been there, that that's what I have always been. So it was as if I were looking at my soul. And the soul is just a consciousness, and it makes you think that Berkeley, you might be right, the soul is awaiting. The soul is always feminine in the esoteric doctrines, because it's supposed to be receptive. So everybody is feminine in that sense. And if you're receptive, it obviously can make you extremely intelligent. Oh. So, I don't mean to be pandering to the women, but a truly receptive woman, somebody who's open to learning, can become so brilliant. Because there's an aptitude. If there were an aptitude test for it. Anyway, and remember, we already spoke of this, citing somebody like Hameroff, that the brain is not so much a creator of thoughts, but a receiver of thoughts, because all the intelligence, everything is all around and through us. So there's a stream, an ocean pouring through the brain, and there are certain brains that are good, built in certain ways so that they're receptors, and they're just open, and the wisdom comes pouring through them. Unless you get guys like Einstein, or then you get some of the mystics or the saints, or however you identify the truly highest beings. The geniuses, there are some geniuses that are good. Not all intelligence is a good correlate with good morality. You can be highly intellectual and have a very high IQ, and you don't have to be a good person to match it. You could wind up being a terrible person. You could want to take control of the world, and make everybody bow down to you. Because there's so many other factors involved in ego. Ego by its nature is always trying to preserve itself. Even when it tries to kill itself, it actually will think, as some people have reported, that they go to a better place. So ego doesn't want to die, it just wants the conditions to end. I want to go to a better place. People cannot conceive of their real death. It's hard to just swallow nothingness. No, you have to believe in something, and it makes it a lot easier. Oh, I go to this place and I go to that place. Hey, maybe you go back to the ocean if you're really lucky. But then you say, well, I'm unconscious again. You're not conscious the way you used to be, but you could be conscious in another way that would be so much grander. I mean, imagine being conscious of yourself as the ocean rather than just a bubble. The ocean is beyond trouble. It's like the authentic is, all the world is care, but the authentic is beyond care. If you are awake as the ocean, you are beyond care. Care takes place in front of you. You watch it. You live it through your bubbles, but eventually you are yourself. You are the ocean. I know it sounds just like mysticism, but I also think it's extremely possible for some people. Not me. Yeah, I'm a slug. I'm not pretending to anything in front of anybody. But I think that some people just have great aptitude. Some of them are born geniuses in that way. I think there are geniuses in different ways, more than just, in mathematics or science or even in art. I think there's something else too that could be implied to be genius. I think some people have these extraordinary lives that are categorically different from the everyday worrisome life of the everyday ego in this everyday world of struggle and trouble, of demand, of being on fire with desire. The Buddha pointed that out a long time ago. Of being alienated from other people, feeling essentially lonely, which I have dubbed ontological loneliness. We seek out closeness. We get married, we have children, we feel, or we get close with our animals, our pets, and we seek it out all the time because clearly we're in a condition where we need to feel a unity with something. So, so the core of human relationship as we experience it in the ego state is care. And so that means, we're always trying to do something for ourselves. Even the people who give themselves away are doing something for themselves because that's what they feel that they should be doing. It's deep down existential decision, which probably is not coming from any place of freedom, but is coming out of one's conditioning and one's DNA and the social milieu, the immediate environment, the more generalized environment, the culture, all the messages that come to you, etc. But it's always going to go through the self. Every decision, no matter how quick, it goes through the self. Even when the self goes to buy a car, wants to buy a station wagon for the kids and comes home with a Corvette. Just proof that there's no real reasoning going on. There's just preliminary. I'm going to go buy a station wagon to carry the 6 kids, and I come home with a 2-seater Corvette. I don't know what made me do it, honey. Put down the gun, please. I'll go turn it back in. I just laugh at the idea of free will, especially because I used to be a champion of free will back in my existential days. I'm still in my existential days, except that I don't try to find freedom where there is virtually no freedom. And every action comes out of such an enormity of causality. I can look at it this way. Maybe I could defend against this, but I like to depict the freedom that a drop of water has. And picture a drop of water in a wave, a big wave, a giant wave, a 10-foot, 12-foot wave crashing on the shores of one of the Hawaiian Islands. 20-foot wave, and behind it is the Pacific Ocean. And here's a drop of water, the individual, and he's got a choice. He wants to claim that he's free. He's really free. And how does he prove his freedom? Well, he either chooses this way or that way in this tiny little less than a bubble. He's a drop at this point. And he chooses either the yellow Corvette or the black Corvette. There's his freedom. And he agonizes over it until he just, okay, and he gives up. I see that much freedom being exerted in the lives of so many people. I have to admit it makes me a determinist. It's kind of it's a soft determinism because I think there's a possibility of freedom at the heart of it, but not attained by most of us. No, most actions. The closest thing we can come to real freedom, and you have to cite Krishnamurti for this, is that seeing how unfree we are from moment to moment. Seeing it, just observing it. So in the only freedom is the observation, is the consciousness of the conditions and the life. And I know it sounds like you have to separate again. You wind up again in another split. It shouldn't be that way because the way you see it is by living your body, living your life. Your body is a field of awareness. Are you not physically aware? If you're not, you're called a schizoid. Yeah, I mean, if you're dead to your feelings, your emotions, and even a lot of your senses, if you could, as one guy I know, he used to put hot stuff in his mouth, burn his mouth to hell, never felt it. He was dead to his body, and he still is quite sure that he's a crazy person. Yeah, he's a teacher of criminology. guy is to know. And but most of us are not dead. We're not schizoids. We're not people removed from our bodily senses and our emotions. So we experience a lot of that, and that is where the freedom is, in the observation, the ability to observe in your consciousness. The remarkable thing, after every bad thing is said about you, ego is selfish, utilitarian, using people and things as instruments, etc., 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 there is a grace to all this, and that is in the fact that you are a conscious being, and you have been thrown here. Existentialists will say that. You've been thrown here. You have no idea. You come up with all kinds of reasons. You become a Christian, a Buddhist, an Islamist. You've got all your, you can pray to all your different forms of spirit powers, call them whatever you will, personalize them, project them onto the world, do whatever you have to do. But the fact is that you are this conscious being that can exist under all kinds of circumstances, being weighted down by all kinds of beliefs. When the fact is, the only thing you know for certain is that you are a conscious being. You are here, you are now. There's your Zen. Be here now. Live in radical ignorance for a little while. Stop pretending that you understand this world. You have to go through this world with a kind of idea that you're understanding it. When I drive from this place, I have to drive, let my body drive my car, recognize all the old signposts, the turns, the other cars, function. It has to function. But that is truly all habit system. That's why we can do it so well. We learn to do it with good habits. People allow the body to drive. So being embodied and being conscious essentially are of the same category. Be physically aware of yourself. It is not a degradation. It's not what some would call a downward ecstasis. You will always have thoughts. The more embodied you are, the better, the cleaner, the more economical, the clearer, the more direct your thoughts will be. The more you're in touch with the deepest aspects of yourself, the more you will feel that you are confident and certain, and you can speak with a sense of your own authority because it's coming from a strong place. And people will hear that, by the way. When people speak from a strong place, other people hear it because they say, I don't know that that's true, but he sounds like he knows it's true. I believe him. And there you fall into another ego trap, the one called idolatry. As I said, I say it again, don't make me your teacher, because if you do, you will destroy me and you'll destroy yourself as well. That's a quote from Krishnamurti, and he's so absolutely right, for I taught in the classroom for 44 years. And there were always kids who hated you and loved, other kids who loved you for the very same reason. You were somebody's daddy. You were some reflection of somebody else. And so you had to put up with, as I did, 44 years of that kind of transference of feelings. But I don't want to be anybody's teacher. And I think if people just listen to the reasoning, they would get more out of it rather than looking at this old dog. I know that people have reacted. I know some years ago, and I tried to start a group, and one young guy came to the house, and we were going to discuss the possibility, but he never even allowed us to discuss it. He took 80% of the time and talked about how he would reject it. He doesn't want to belong, he doesn't want to read this, he doesn't want to learn anything more. He already has found his truth. And I was baffled. Why did you come here? You know, I didn't ask him. I just let him talk, and then he went away after a couple of hours. And that's fine, you know, but why did you come here in the first place? You see how there was never an intent. And of course it would be impossible for this guy was a big muscle guy, big workout guy. And why in the world would he allow some little broken down old guy to be his teacher? he's going to have to get some Schwarzenegger type to teach him. And that's really an unfortunate thing. And I think that if I'm speaking to any of my nephew John's group of weightlifters and trainees, that could be an issue. And if it is an issue, it should be addressed. You can have fun with it. And personally, I don't give a rat's ass if people call me an old broken down bastard, because I am. But we'll see where other people are when they're 79 and they've gone through what I have. At least I can walk. And I can still talk. And it can be fun, because I will drag you into places. I will take you to the bottom of the ocean and teach you how to breathe. It's okay. Thought will not hurt you unless you turn it into evil and hatred. But questioning everything, that's philosophy. Philosophy questions everything, including the questioner. Philosophy never stops looking. It's fine, and a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to stick their head in a dark place where the sun doesn't shine, and that's true of many people, and therefore none of what I have to say is directed at them. But then there are other people, and I call them intelligent, sensitive, and inquisitive, who would probably enjoy conversation.